Thanks for joining us today. My name is Tyler. I run most of our Tier 1 support here at PTS. And today, as many of you have already seen from the registration form, what I just wanted to go over today was how to create a super basic RFID application in TracerPlus from scratch. And then after that, we can talk about one of our more in-demand RFID features, which is our Geiger function. So in order to show off our RFID app today, I'm just pretty much going to use TracerPlus desktop to do all of our configuration. And I'm going to transfer the project over to my mobile device. I happen to be using a Zebra TC20 with an RFT 2000 RFID sled. And then later when we get to our Geiger, I'm going to have to use a bit of TracerPlus Connect in order to get some records onto my device. So first things first, this is starting from scratch. So really all I've done so far, let me, show my screen. Okay, so now really all I've done up to this point is create a fresh project in TracerPlus desktop. And all we can see now is it's got 10 fields. I haven't even set up the form designer, so I'll do that. And I'm really starting from nothing. So if you were starting from nothing, this is pretty much how quick you can put together an RFID application that's super basic. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to clear out some of these excess fields because I really only want to have 2 fields right now. Realistically, I could have 1 field, but I'll start with 2. So here I'll reset this back to default, and I've just got my 2 fields. I'm going to make 1 field just a drop down, and I'll add in a few rooms as if I were using this as a location. And I suppose it could be even more basic than this. I could not have a drop down with a location. I could even just have a single RFID tag field for scanning tags. So I'll call this a location, and then I'm going to configure my RFID tag field that I'm actually going to be scanning tags into. So I really just have my 2 fields right here. My location and my tag ID. The location, again, is the dropdown. So now I'm actually going to turn on RFID data capture for this project. And to do that, I just come over here into data capture in TracerPlus, and I will enable RFID scanner. And this allows me to then, if I have an RFID enabled device, collect RFID data. I'm also going to disable the barcode scanner because I don't want that to be used automatically. I'll bump up the power a little bit here so I make sure I'm getting all the tags that I want. And then just as an added functionality, I suppose, I'm going to add a smart form rule. And what this does is it allows me to make sure that the data that I'm scanning, my RFID tags, are going into the right field, no matter where I am in the form. So I'll just create a smart form rule that says, when an RFID read is complete, I want it to go to my RFID tag field. So again, that helps me send my RFID tags to the correct field regardless of where I am in the form. So that's all it takes to enable RFID. So now let me configure the rest of my project form. If I were to deploy this right now, it would work perfectly fine. There would be no issue with it, and you could scan RFID tags. However, I'm going to add in one more thing that'll make the visualizing of this a bit easier. And I'll create a grid on my project form. And in particular, this will be a cached grid. And now what that means is that normally, if I were not using a cached grid, whenever I scanned an RFID tag, it would have to do a submission, and then it would scan another tag, and then it would have to do a submission. And this would be kind of slow. So instead of doing that, the cached grid will allow us to scan in a whole batch of RFID tags, which then allow us to submit them all in one go after we're all done, instead of having to wait for each record to be submitted individually. So to do that, I'll just create this grid on my form using this grid tool here. Then I'll select the grid that I've created, and I'm going to change it here to cached mode. And this gives us a few more options. What I'll do then is I want to determine what fields I want to display in my grid. So to do that, I'm going to add 2 fields because we have 2 fields. I'll make one my RFID tag ID, and I'll make the other one my location. From there, I need to determine what this column is actually going to contain. So I want it to be mapped to I want this to go to my RFID tag field, which happens to be denoted by the control ID 7, because these little control IDs here on our form are unique identifiers which allow us to interact with each control object on our form. So in this case, what I'm doing is binding a field to this column in the grid. So for this tag ID, I want it to go to field 7, as you can see here. And then for the location, I want this to go to field 5. And the last things I'm going to do in this grid is I'll make it so the grid is updated whenever I scan in an RFID tag. So I'm going to change this to required and binding true. And I'll make it so that it triggers binding true. So whenever this field gets updated, it will trigger the binding and move records into the grid. And then I'm going to do pretty much the opposite for the location. I'm going to leave this as required and binding false. So technically, we don't need a location to scan RFID tags. And I'm going to make this not trigger a binding for whenever it's selected, because I don't want to update the grid when a location is selected, just when an RFID tag is selected. And I'm also going to make this column a little bit bigger. And I don't want to see the location of my grid, so I'll make that small. I guess one more thing that I can do is I'm going to add a label down here, which will allow me to see how many records I actually have in the grid. So if I select the grid again, here in the record count control ID, it's currently set to -1, which is the default, like our blank really. But I want to change that to the new label that I've created, which is 12. And that will allow me to see how many records are currently sitting in my grid. So that's pretty much all the configuration that I have to do here. I set up my 2 fields, my location and my RFID tag, and I created a grid, which is where I will be submitting my record or scanning my records into, which they will then be posted from the cached grid into my record. And that reminds me, I'm going to configure a grid post button down here, because normally a submission is what we'd be doing. But in particular with a cached grid, because like I mentioned, records aren't really submitted when we use a cached grid. They're rather kept in like a holding pen until they are eventually committed to the device's memory. So I have to use a particular button action to do that post, and that's just going to be a grid post. So when I change this button to a grid post, I'll also rename it so it says post on my form. And then I have to designate the grid that I actually want this grid post button to post. So again, back to the control IDs. This grid has a control ID of 11. So I'm telling my post button, post the grid that is designated as control ID 11. So now that should be pretty much all we have to do here. I will take one more look to make sure all our settings are correct. So it looks okay. Everything we need is here. So now let's see what this looks like in our on our device itself. So to do that, I will be using a program called Visor, which allows me to, on one hand, really control the device from my PC, but it also has the secondary application of allowing me to share the screen of my device with you guys. So what I'm going to do is, after I've completely built my project, I'm going to click this Build Then Deploy button and then deploy the project over to my device. So I want the platform to be Android because, again, I'm using a Zebra TC20 with an RFD 2000 sled, and this is an Android device. So what I'm going to do is what we call a web deploy, where I will use the deploy server on my PC and then actually wirelessly move that over to my device. And I can do that in one of two ways. One way is by, well, they're both really done here. And you can see I have two options to download my project. I either have the manual entry, in which I will enter my IP address and the port that the deploy server is running on, which is 4409, as you can see. And then I can download that this way. Or if I really wanted to, I could open up the rear-facing camera on this device and actually scan this QR code. These are both covered under what we call our web deploy, and they do importantly require the device and the PC to both be on the same network in order for that to function. So I'm going to do a manual entry deployment here. So as you can see, I want to look for this deploy server that's located at this location, which is my IP address, and then the port that the deploy server is running on, which is 4409. And we can see that sort of corroborated in here. So now I'll hit this refresh button in order to refresh the project list of the project that I want to download. And here are all my projects, and you can see the project that I'm looking for that I just made is project 1. So I'll select that and hit download. It'll download my project and then tell me it was successful. And now when I go to refresh this, it should reload my new project. And there it goes, and it's going to look the same. But that's only because I didn't make many structural changes. So now I deployed that over, and it should look like this on my device. So let's take a look at that. And there we go. We can see the project that I had built, and it's sitting on my device. I'm going to clear out some of these records real quick. And here is our actual project. There are all the fields we put on it. So let's step through this real quick. So if you'll remember, I set this up to be a drop-down with some locations in it. And here are our locations, the room 1, 2, 3. I'll just select one of them. And then I want to start scanning tags. So on my RFID 2000, I'm going to pull the trigger and start scanning RFID tags into my grid. And you can see down here at the bottom, where I set up my record count, I have an ever-increasing number of RFID tags being scanned into my grid. And we can even cycle through all of them down here. Okay, this whole long list of RFID tags. And this just looks a little bit cramped because I didn't do any sort of configuration with screen resolution. So it started us off kind of small, but if I had adjusted that, we'd be able to see many more records per window into the grid. But really, that's pretty much all the configuration we had to do. I just set up a field, two fields rather. I enabled RFID scanning, and I created a cached grid to submit our records into. So now, say I collected all my records that are in this location, and I want to just hit post down here, which will go through the process of submitting all my records to the device. And if you look quick, I currently have 0 records on the device. And after this finishes, I'll have 127, and it will clear out my cached grid because everything that was in the grid has been moved from its holding pen in the grid over to the device's record. And it'll allow me to start fresh once again. So that's really the most, not necessarily the most basic, because I did create a cached grid and I had a drop down, but you can see we can get that done in 10 minutes. We can create an RFID enabled application that'll quickly gather hundreds, if not more, RFID tags that you can use to do your data collection. And now, something that's a bit on the more complicated side, I'll show you guys this Geiger function that I had mentioned earlier. So to do that, I'm going to use a different project that I already have set up for this. So I'll come in here, and I'm going to try to find it real quick. I just have to remember which one it is, and I probably should have done this beforehand. Okay, here we go. So you may see some similarities to the project we were just working on, but this one has a few more complexities to it. In this case, what we're looking for is actually here in our Find Chemicals session. And this is going to allow us to use TracerPlus Connect to send over a list of records that that we've designated as missing from one of our databases. And we want to use the Geiger function in TracerPlus to find them. So real quick, what I'm going to do, I'm going to make sure this is all set up right, and it should be, is I'm going to redeploy this project back to my device. So much the same way we did it earlier. I'm going to use the deploy server and then download the project here. And this time I'm looking for my Find RFID chemical tracking project. So I'll select that from the list and hit download. And then when I refresh, we should see our new project that we just loaded up. Okay. So now I'm just going to clear out some of these records, make sure I have nothing crazy in here. Okay. So just to briefly touch on what I'm going to be doing here, I have a TracerPlus Connect project set up that I can use to sync information from my database to my device. And in this case, it's this profile that's going to send over a list of RFID tag IDs that I have designated as missing. And if I come over here into my data viewer, you can see that here are my tag IDs that I've said, well, these are missing. I want to find them by using my device. So I'm actually going to use Connect to send these over to my device into a list, and then I can pick them from the list and try to find them. So right on the device, I have set this Get List button up as a sync button. So when I push it, it will sync over a number of records from my database to my device. And again, just to point it out, here are the tags that I had in my database, and here are the tags as they exist on the device. So I just moved this list of tags over to the device. And I said, all right, these are missing. Let me go ahead and use the device to find them. So with this particular configuration, what I'll do is I can select one of these missing tags from this list right here. And what that'll do is it'll populate that value into this field and then press this locate button, which will then start our Geiger locator. So I'll do that right now. I'll select this record and it pushes it into this field and opens up our tag locator. And then hypothetically, if this device is within range of me, I should be able to pull the trigger and try to find it. And this one may not be because I configured this some time ago. So let me see if I can find one that's still nearby. There we go. So you can see, and maybe even hear, that the closer I get to this tag, the tag locator will tell me sort of approximately where it is. You can see I'm getting warmer right now, but I unfortunately have to stay within range of my PC. So I can't take it too close, but you can see that if I move my device away, the signal gets a little bit weaker. So as I get closer to it again, it'll tell me that I'm getting within range of this tag and consequently getting out of range of this tag. So hypothetically, if I said, great, I found that, I can go ahead and close this and then mark that tag as found by pushing this button down here. And if I do, then it removes it from this list because I have found it. So it is then taken away from the list of tags that I need to pick. And I can just do this for each subsequent tag if it still exists in my nearby environment. I can say, great, all right, there's my tag, sure. I'll close that and I'll hit found again and it removes it from the list again. And this can be performed with as many or as few tags as you would like. So that's pretty much it. I'm I hope you all learned that it can be as little as 10 minutes for you to set up an RFID application. They can be very simple, or they can range up to what you just saw, which can be not terribly complex, but still somewhat complex. And maybe you want to make use of this RFID Geiger, either the application itself or just the function. And just to mention, this application that I'm showing you right here, if you were interested in playing around with this Geiger, or even just doing normal data collection as we do here, this application is a sample and is available for free from our sample app library. And I can just show that off real quick, just in case anyone wants to use this application in particular in desktop or even on our website itself. If you come here into our sample projects and go to asset tracking, or I believe it's asset tracking. Maybe it's not. There it is. Inventory management. This is the application that I was just demoing for you guys with Geiger, this RFID chemical inventory tracking. And then you could just hit next. This will import the project, and you could go on and use it for your own purposes. So real quick, we can take some time out to answer any questions you guys have in the last 5 minutes. I don't see any right now, but while I tie this up, if you guys have any questions that you'd like to ask, you can post them down there in the questions box. But I hope this has been informative. This video can be recorded for you guys to pick up at any time later if you want to look over it again. And we also have a ton of great information on our knowledge base, which can be located at support.tracerplus.com, or on our YouTube channel, where you can find this video and many more about any topic imaginable concerning TracerPlus. Plenty for sure about RFID. So I don't see any questions. So I guess we can just go ahead and wrap it up. Thanks, guys, for joining us today. I hope you learned something. I hope you're not intimidated by how RFID needs to be set up. It can be super quick, just like you saw. So yeah, I hope this has been informative, and thank you for joining us.
Thanks for watching. If you enjoy our content, be sure to like and subscribe, and visit our channel below for more. You can also find us online at TracerPlus.com, or on Facebook, Twitter, or LinkedIn. If you have any questions, feel free to call or email us at any time, and we'll be happy to help.